The sun is a hammer, beating down at 90 degrees on the cracked misery dirt. August 30th, 1904, St. Louis inside the Olympic Stadium. The crowd is erupting in cheers for a man who shouldn't even be there. He is smiling, waving, and accepting a gold medal from the daughter of the President of the United States. But he is a fraud. 11 miles of his race were spent comfortably in the back seat of a car. Meanwhile, miles away in the choking dust, the real winner is literally dying. His skin has turned a ghostly ash grey. His heart is only beating because he's being forced by injection of rat poison. He is hallucinating, begging for water that will never come. Before this sun sets, 18 men will be in the hospital. One will have his stomach leaning, shredding by dust. Another will be hunted through cornfields by a pack of wild dogs. This wasn't a marathon, it was a 24 miles crime scene, and today we are going to find out who planned it. To understand the race, you have to understand the circus that surrounded it. The 1904 Olympics were not an independent event. They were a sideshow to the St. Louis World's Fair. This was a 1200-acre palace of progress, where the world came to see the first electric lights, first X-ray machines, and the birth of the 20th century. But beneath the lights was a darker reality. The fair featured living anthropology exhibits, essentially human zoos, where people from across the globe were put on display like animals. It was in this atmosphere of human experimentation that our villain enters the story, James Sullivan. Sullivan wasn't just an organizer. He was a man obsessed with a theory he called purposeful dehydration. He believed that athletes perform better if they weren't allowed to drink water while competing. To him, the marathon wasn't a race. It was a laboratory to test the limits of the human breed. He set the starting gun for 3:03 p.m., the absolute hottest part of a humid 90 degrees misery afternoon. He chose a course that wasn't paved. It was a 24 miles dirt track through hills that would kick up suffocating clouds of dust with every step, and the water on a course that was literally shredding the runner's lungs. Sullivan provided only 2 water stations for the entire 24 miles, one at mile 6 and one at mile 12. After that, you are at the mercy of the sun. Sullivan didn't just want a winner, he wanted to see who would break first. And as 32 men stood at the starting line, they had no idea they were about to become the victim of the most dangerous experiment in sports history. As the heat began to shimmer over the Missouri hills, 32 men stood at the starting line, but they were not the elite athletes you'd expect. In fact, some of them had never even run a marathon before. Take Andren Carvajal. He was a mailman from Cuba who had raised money for his trip by running the entire length of his island nation. But when he landed in New Orleans, he lost every cent he had in a poker game. He had to hitchhike and walk over 700 miles just to reach St. Louis. He arrived at the starting line wearing a heavy long-sleeved shirt, long trousers, and a beret. He didn't even have running shoes. He was wearing street boots. A fellow athlete actually had to take a pair of scissors and cut his pants off at the knees just so he could move his legs. Then there were Lan Tomian and Jan Mashiani. They were the first black Africans to ever compete in the Olympic Games. But they were not professional runners. They were students at a local university who happened to be working at the World's Fair. They showed up to run 24 miles through the dust completely barefoot. And finally, there was the favorite, Thomas Hicks. He was an experienced runner, but he was about to become the centerpiece of James Sullivan's darkest experiment. The gun fired at 3:03 p.m. The 32 men vanished into a wall of dust. Within minutes, the race wouldn't just be about speed. It would be about who could survive the nightmare Sullivan had created. 10 miles in, and the 1904 marathon was no longer a race, it was a massacre. The Missouri roads were not just hills, they were death traps of fine silicate dust. Because the race was followed by official cars and horse-drawn carriages, a massive grey cloud was kicked into the air. The runners weren't breathing oxygen, they were breathing dirt. For William Garcia, the dust was a death sentence. He was found collapsed on the side of the road, unconscious. They found that the dust has coated his esophagus and shredded his stomach leaning. He was coughing up blood, his internal organs literally being ground down by the road. He was running on. Had he not been found, he would have been the first athlete to die on live Olympic ground. But while some were dying, others were escaping. Fred Loris, the American favorite, hit a wall at mile 9. He didn't just quit, he adopted. He flagged down a passing car, hopped in the passenger seat, and spent the next 11 miles waving at the other runners while he cruised at 20 miles per hour. And then there were the dogs. Lan Tonyan, the barefoot runner from South Africa, was on a track for a top 5 finish. But near the halfway point, he was cornered by a pack of aggressive wild Missouri dogs. They didn't just bark, they hunted him. Tomyan was forced over a mile of course, sprinting for his life through the cornfields just to avoid being torn apart. The heat was 90 degrees. The water was gone. The runners were being eaten by the road, hunted by animals, and cheated by their peers. And in the distance, the man with the rat poison was waiting. As the sun reached its brutal peak, the race was no longer about legs and lungs, it was about chemistry. Thomas Hicks was the American hope, but by mile 20, he was walking corpse. He began to hallucinate, seeing ghosts in the Missouri dust. He begged to lie down. He begged his support team for water. But James Sullivan's disciple had other plans. They didn't give him water, they gave him a cocktail of death. First, they cracked a raw egg into a glass of brandy. Then they added the secret ingredient, strychnine. Today we know strychnine as a primary ingredient in rat poison. In high doses, it causes violent convulsions and terrifying painful death. But in 1904, it was believed to be a powerful stimulant. Hicks swallowed the poison, then another dose, then another. His skin didn't just turn pale, it turned a ghostly metallic ash gray. His muscles became rigged and mechanical. He wasn't running anymore. He was a biological machine being jerked forward by toxic chemicals. His brain was shutting down, but the poison was forcing his heart to keep screaming. While this was happening, the man who had slept in the car, Fred Loris, was already approaching the stadium. The crowd was cheering for a cheat, while the real hero was being turned into a medical freak show just miles away. Back at the Olympic Stadium, the crowd was on its feet. A runner was finally appeared at the gates. It was Fred Loris. The crowd went wild. Here was the American hero, Alice Roosevelt, the daughter of the president, placed a laurel wreath on his head and was moments away from handing him the gold medal. But just as the cameras flashed, the truth came out. Someone in the crowd pointed a finger They had seen Lors not running but sitting comfortably in a car for 11 miles off the course. Lors didn't even apologize. He laughed. He claimed it was all just a practical joke. The stadium fell into a stunned, angry silence. The gold was stripped away and the race was wide open again. But out on the road, the joke was over. Thomas Hicks was finally approaching the stadium, but he wasn't a man anymore. He was a chemical shell. His trainers were literally holding him up, his arms swinging him forward while his feet dragged through the dirt. Every time his toes hit the ground, his legs moved in a mechanical, ghostly shuffle. He was hallucinating that he still had 20 miles to go. Even as he crossed the finish line, Hicks didn't celebrate. He didn't even know he had won. He was immediately rushed to a team of doctors. He had lost 8 pounds in less than 4 hours. He was so close to death that if he had run one more mile, the strychnine in his system likely would have stopped his heart forever. He had won the gold, but the prize was his humanity. The dust in St. Louis eventually settled, but the damage was permanent. For Thomas Hicks, the victory was hollow. He had won the gold, but he never ran a competitive marathon again. The poison and the physical trauma had aged him years in a single afternoon. And what of our villain? James Sullivan. Did he apologize for his purposeful dehydration experiment? No. In his official reports, he called the race most successful ever held, claiming it proved the invincibility of the American spirit. He ignored the fact that his theory had nearly turned the Olympic Stadium into a morgue. Adrian Carvajal, the Cuban mailman, didn't leave empty-handed. Though he came in fourth, he became a national hero in Cuba. As for the South African runners, Lantonian and Jan Mashiani, they quietly returned to their work at the World's Fair, having made history as the first black Africans to ever compete, even if the world at the time refused to give them the respect they deserved. The 1904 marathon was so disastrous that the Olympic Committee almost banned the event entirely. They realized that the line between sport and survival horror had been blurred beyond recognition. Today we look back at the rat poison, the wild dogs, and the human zoos as a relic of a primitive past. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question: how much of our own progress is built on the suffering of those who were never meant to survive the test? We cheer for the winners, but we forgot that sometimes the greatest experiment of all is just seeing who is left standing when the dust clears. The 1904 Olympic Marathon ended over a century ago, but its ghost still haunts the world of sports. We call it the worst Olympics ever. We laugh at the man in the car, and we shudder at the thought of the rat poison. But before we close this chapter of uncomfortable history, I have to ask you, what would you have done if you were Thomas Hicks and your trainer told you that this poison was the only way to win gold for your country? Would you have swallowed it? If you were James Sullivan, would you have prioritized the science of the experiment over the lives of the man running in the 90-degree heat? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Was this a race or was it a crime? And more importantly, do you think the win at all costs mentality of 1904 has really left over modern world, or have we just gotten better at hiding the poison? If you find this deep dive into the 1904 disaster worth your time, consider subscribing to Uncomfortable History. I spent a full week researching, gathering making these visuals and recording these stories to bring you the history that wasn't meant to be remembered. Hit the notification bell as you don't miss next Monday's documentary, because the past is full of secrets and some of them are much more uncomfortable than this. Thank you for watching, and remember, keep questioning the history.